Blog Talk Radio.
Something's gone wrong. For all our vigilance and battle scars over the Bill of Rights, if we let the flame of freedom's torch grow cold, because there can be no torch to pass where there's no flame.
Freedom has only one enemy it cannot defeat, and that is negligence. So your presence here, now, today, is an act of reverence. Of all man's works beneath the heavens, none shines brighter than our Constitution. I think Jefferson and Paine, Adams, Madison, Mason, Franklin, I think they're looking down right now at us. I think they understand what we're trying to do, what we strive to do. Every time our country stands in the path of danger, an instinct seems to summon her finest first, those who truly understand her. When freedom shivers in the cold shadow of true peril, it's always the patriots who first hear the call. When loss of liberty is looming, as it is now, the siren sounds first in the hearts of freedom's vanguard.
Good evening, everybody. This is Joe Joseph, along with my partners tonight, John King and A.C. Griffith. We have a very interesting show for you tonight. Our guests featured are Kevin Annett the first hour and John Moore the second. How's it going, fellas?
Good to be
Great,
with you
Joe,
tonight.
great. Can't wait to get into it. How you doing, AC?
Just fine.
Hot diggity dog. Well, let's get into this. Let's give a little background on Kevin here. And Kevin Annett, of course, is an ex-preacher, and he just got back from Europe, by the way, serving papers to the Pope. You know, that takes a lot of gumption to be able to do that, and I'm quite surprised that he actually made it back in one piece. that's for sure. But he's the author of 2 books, and we welcome you to the show, Kevin. How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing fine. Thanks for having me again.
Oh no, the pleasure's all ours. So how did it go out there? We saw a lot of pictures. We saw some good emails shoot back and forth, and a lot of good updates. Maybe you could tell the listeners a little bit about what your purpose for going out there was, and what came of it.
Well, for me it was more and more it's realizing that this whole crime that we're dealing with has historical roots in Europe. A lot of it began there. It began against ancestors including my own, who hundreds of years ago were facing the same kind of persecution and genocide at the hands of the Catholic Church as was inflicted over here on Native people and others. So, I realized that we've got to kind of go back to the roots and say not only where did this come from, but what caused it. What in our thinking, what in our culture is causing this? Not just genocide, but the notion that we can go into other countries and destroy them if they're not like us. The idea that we can conquer the earth. That's all got roots in our culture in Europe, and so for that reason I was drawn back. But also, from a more practical level, there's been increasing interest and demand really to set up some kind of investigation right in Europe. And I've worked with survivors groups of people who've survived rape and that at the hands of priests in 5 different countries. And these groups all established in June a group called the International Tribunal into Crimes of Church and State. And we coalesced when I was over there and decided that in next April we want to hold public hearings in London where, we issued subpoenas. They're really what they're called under international law are diplomatic summonses to the Pope and 6 cardinals, the 6 top cardinals in the Vatican, asking them to come and defend themselves against charges of crimes against humanity. And that's going to be next April in London. And it was also to take part in an amazing event in London where over 20,000 people protested the Pope. And that was one of the most amazing things I've ever been in, just the level of, outrage, but also joy and commitment to kind of, expose these crimes and to say, like, why is the British government spending £20 million bringing this criminal to England?
Yeah.
To be, it was kind of like the way the British media portrayed it. It was like the second coming of Christ.
Which is interesting, Kev. I mean, this is the English.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I mean, to have the papacy coming over there and the papacy coming over there and having such a to-do in England is kind of, it made me scratch my head too. So you're not alone there.
Well, the Crown of England is a partner, of course, with the Catholic Church in a lot of these crimes. I mean, they set up the Indian boarding schools here in Canada. They were responsible for protecting the Catholic Church, for example, in Ireland when they set up these Catholic orphanages and the Magdalene laundries, which were really sweatshop operations, for the church to make money off the backs of young children. It went on for a long time. There's also a treaty. It was called the Treaty of Verona a couple of years before Magna Carta. And King John in the year 1213, basically he was strapped for cash, and so he went to the Vatican and asked for a bailout. And in return, the Pope said, okay, but you're going to be my vassal. And he took an oath of loyalty to the Pope, and apparently that was never revoked. So, I mean, legally, there's been the argument made that the Crown of England is kind of a wholly owned subsidiary of the Vatican, so that'd be an interesting thing for the lawyers to look at.
Sure would. Hey, Griff, I want you to get on this conversation tonight, too. I've been taking too much of center stage here, so...
No, I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to all of it. I'm having a good time listening to you and Kevin. I want to ask Kevin, is the Vatican, the church in Italy, styled after a corporation?
Yes, it's really styled after an empire. They took over the land and the property and the titles and everything of the Roman Empire, and they've been functioning that way since the year 317. But specifically in terms of like their financial arm, the Vatican Bank, and their function as a corporation, in 1929, Benito Mussolini granted them status as a state and restored to them the property that was taken in 1870. Garibaldi united Italy, and he took away the papal states. And from 1870 to 1929, the Vatican didn't exist legally, and then Mussolini restored them, gave them back all the property, and he gave them about $1.5 billion lira, which they used to establish the Vatican Bank. And at the same time, the Vatican was incorporated as a corporation, but of course a tax-free haven. They pay no import or export duties. And the Vatican Bank cannot be monitored. You can't even know who the boards of directors are. They don't issue financial reports, annual reports of any kind. They're secret societies. And, the last pope who tried to investigate the Vatican Bank got killed for it, John Paul I in 1978. There's a good book written about that, In God's Name, by David Yallop, in which clearly, the man was poisoned because he discovered that the Vatican Bank was laundering money for the mafia, for right-wing dictatorships all over the world, and a kind of a shadowy group called P2, which is kind of a parallel government in Italy that is run by a lot of the generals and the security chiefs and all that, top business people. And, he discovered all this, and he didn't last long. So, definitely, to just answer your question, that yes, they're not only a corporation, but they're a secret society that can't be monitored, and they're not really liable to the law at all.
But they are not a corporation.
They are yes, they are incorporated. They operate as a corporation. Yes.
But they have many companies under the big umbrella operating worldwide. Some are corporations, some are hidden. I remember when I was with the CIA, there was an operation way in the back of my memory. Out of Washington, they had business dealings with, it was translated the Society for the Immobile. It had to do with children. It had to do with handicapped children in the Catholic Church from Washington to the Vatican.
And, right, well, they operate. Yes. I'm sorry, did I interrupt? Did you want to finish?
No, go ahead.
One of the ways they operate is the financial matters are controlled within every diocese. So this is the argument they're making legally why the Pope can't be sued, because they say, well, the buck stops with the bishop or the archbishop. They handle all the financial matters. They deal with all the employee relations, including the priests. So they divide up. Like in any big company, they just there's no ultimate accountability, right? They're just kind of shifting that around. But one thing that really became clear, the more you look into this, is the fact that, like you say, a lot of their assets are hidden. For example, the Jesuits are big owners, or were until a few years ago. Maybe that's changed. But Citibank of America had a lot of Catholic money in it, hundreds of millions of dollars invested in America through, that really you can connect to the Vatican. So it's mostly just an iceberg. You can't see a lot of it.
So the Vatican is one operation, and the local churches are separate corporations operating under the umbrella of the Vatican.
That's right, and it's like I guess a mafia don, quite similar to that idea that he's got buffers between him and what they do on the ground, and it's the same thing here.
I pursued the question in the United States some years ago, and I was told the government told me that it's a challenging question to define a church. It's not a corporation, but it is. It's like half pregnant, I was told, sometimes, maybe. So no one really can define what a church is in the United States. It's a separate thing. It's not a corporation, but it is a corporation. It's separated from the state, but it's controlled by the state, and it goes on and on like that.
Well, Jeffrey Robertson, he's a human rights lawyer in Britain. He's just written a really good book called The Case of the Pope, and he looks into all the legal arguments the Vatican makes, and it's mostly just fog and mirrors. It's nothing substantial, but he calls the Vatican a Santa Claus state. The term he uses, as in it's a fiction that everyone's believing in. So you don't upset the kids, you don't tell them there's no Santa Claus, but it's a convenient fiction that everybody is operating according to. But if the Vatican was really a state, for example, it wouldn't be able to get away with what it's doing because, for example, when it's impeding justice, when it's got this policy that says that when children are raped, the pontifical secret is imposed and nobody's allowed to talk about it. And you don't get excommunicated for raping a child, you get excommunicated for telling about it. And that's the regime. Now, if any state did that, it's obstruction of justice, interfering with the affairs in another country. Under the law of nations, that's not allowed, and yet the Vatican gets away with it. So that's really the question: how are they able to get away with it?
In your research, have you uncovered other criminal activity of the Vatican?
Besides child rape and everything, one of the things that David Yallop goes into in his book is the Vatican, through their bank, funded the Argentine junta to buy Exocet missiles in the Falklands War in 1982. They're very heavily into the arms industry, and one of the things that came out in the course of that is that they go back, and of course people probably know the whole history of the rat lines coming out of Europe after World War II, where a lot of the Nazis were brought into the West, into America and other countries through the Dominicans and other, the Catholic Church and its different branches. There was a big lawsuit by survivors of the genocide in Yugoslavia during the 30s because the senior cardinals in the Vatican went into Yugoslavia, and the Serbs were Orthodox Christians, the Croatians were Catholics. And so they sided the Croatians with the Croatians, armed them, and they slaughtered hundreds of thousands of Serbs and loaded them into concentration camps and that. Now, the relatives of the survivors of that genocide tried to sue the Vatican to recover their lost property and wealth and everything, and for compensation for what happened to their families. They were told, this was just a few years ago, they were told by Vatican lawyers, their position was these actions predated human rights conventions, therefore they weren't crimes at the time. But it turned out that the Vatican had looted lots of money in conjunction with the Nazis all over Europe through their Swiss banks and everything. So there's a lot of stolen money, the line in the Vatican coffers out of the genocide that came out of the 1930s and 40s in Europe. So, I mean, these are just some, and to say nothing, of course, of the genocide that the Catholic Church did all over the world for 500 years against non-Christians. the Native people here in Canada. I mean, over 50,000 children died in the residential schools alone, mostly run by the Catholics. So I mean, this goes on and on.